Claire Reynolds was known among her friends and family as someone who thrived in nature. Hiking wasn't just a hobby for her. It was a way of escaping the noise of everyday life. She often described the forest as her second home, a place where she could breathe, think, and find peace. So when she announced her plan to hike alone through a section of the Rocky Mountains in 2017, no one was surprised. They trusted her skills and her instincts. But no one knew that this particular journey would be her last. On the morning she left, Claire messaged her sister with a cheerful text. "No signal up there, so don't worry if I'm quiet for a couple of days. I'll check in once I'm back." She packed light but carefully: maps, a compass, a tent, food supplies, and her journal. She even carried a whistle for emergencies, something she'd never forgotten on her solo trips. Yet when investigators later checked, her phone's final location showed something odd. It stopped pinging miles away from her planned route, near an older, unmarked trail that hikers usually avoided. That trail had its own unsettling reputation. Local guides often warned newcomers about it, calling it the silent path, because animals rarely ventured there and strange noises were sometimes reported at night. Most dismissed it as superstition, but others swore the place carried an unnatural stillness, as if something, or someone, was watching. For reasons no one could explain, Claire's footprints led directly toward that very path, her boots pressing deeper into the soil as if she had quickened her pace. As the hours turned into days, her absence set off alarm bells. When she missed her return date, her family contacted authorities immediately. Search teams were dispatched, combing through the woods with dogs and helicopters. They covered miles of rugged terrain, shouting her name into the vast emptiness, but the forest gave nothing back. It was as if the trees themselves had swallowed her whole. Volunteers kept hoping for some trace, broken branches, torn fabric, anything, but the woods remained unnervingly clean. What baffled everyone most was the abrupt ending of her trail. Her footprints, so clear and defined along the dirt, suddenly stopped in the middle of the path. No struggle, no drag marks, just nothing. Experienced trackers said it was impossible, almost as if she had stepped into thin air. From that moment, whispers began spreading, not just about Claire's disappearance, but about the forest itself. 2 days after Claire's disappearance, rescuers finally came across something: her campsite. It was hidden in a small clearing surrounded by thick trees, almost too neat, too untouched, as though she had only just stepped away. Her tent was pitched with precision, the stakes driven firmly into the ground, and her belongings were carefully arranged inside. Nothing was scattered, nothing out of place. The eerie part was the silence. Normally, abandoned campsites tell a story: food wrappers blown by the wind, ashes in a fire pit, footprints circling the area. But Claire's campsite was frozen in time, like a photograph of someone who had never returned to finish the moment. Inside the tent, investigators found her sleeping bag still neatly rolled, never used. Her backpack rested against the tent wall, half unzipped but full of untouched supplies. Protein bars, trail mix, and sealed water bottles remained intact. Her flashlight had fresh batteries, and her journal was lying at the very top of her bag, blank on the last page she had written. It was as though she had prepared for the night, but never lived through it. There were no signs of panic, no evidence she had packed quickly or been forced away. She had simply walked off. The search team expected to find some clue of why she left the tent: a broken branch, a trail of footprints, a dropped item, anything to show a sense of direction. Instead, they found a single boot print leading out of the campsite, pointing toward the woods. The print was deep, pressed firmly into the soil, as though she had left with intent. Yet, what chilled investigators most was that there was no return print. Just one path outward, and nothing else. It was as if Claire had walked into the trees, and never touched the ground again. Rescuers combed the surrounding area, circling outward from the campsite in widening loops, but the forest remained uncooperative. Dogs picked up her scent briefly, only to lose it within minutes. No broken twigs, no disturbed foliage, no sign of wildlife reacting to her presence. Everything looked eerily untouched, like the woods had swallowed every trace of her. For seasoned search and rescue workers, it was deeply unsettling. Campsites usually tell chaotic stories when hikers vanish, but this one was silent, immaculate, almost staged. Word of the discovery spread quickly among the volunteers, and with it came whispers. Some believed she had left willingly, stepping away in search of something she had heard or seen. Others weren't so sure. The campsite gave off a strange feeling, as if someone, or something, had been waiting for her to leave the safety of her tent. The thought grew heavier when they realized how deliberately placed the single boot print had been, as though it had been meant to lure attention. Yet, without Claire, without answers, the clearing became just another haunting piece of the puzzle. Months passed, and the official search for Claire gradually slowed down. Families of missing hikers often dread that moment. The quiet shift when investigators stop calling daily and news reports fade into the background. But then, nearly 3 months later, during what seemed like an unrelated task, a new clue emerged. A group of wildlife researchers were conducting a survey in the same forest when one of them spotted something unusual strapped high to the trunk of a tree. It was small, camouflaged in dark casing, almost invisible unless you stood at the right angle. At first glance, it looked like equipment left by other researchers, but as they got closer, they realized it wasn't theirs at all. The object was a motion-activated trail camera, the kind used by hunters or survivalists. But this one was different. It was positioned higher than normal, angled not at animals on the ground, but at the very path where Claire's footprints had last been found. The placement felt intentional, as if someone had wanted to monitor that exact stretch of trail. The researchers immediately reported it to the authorities, who carefully unmounted the device and carried it out for examination. No one could answer the most pressing question: who had placed it there? When investigators studied the camera, they noticed details that unsettled them. It wasn't brand new, but it was far from old, clean, well-maintained, and functional. It had been camouflaged so effectively with strips of bark and mud that it blended seamlessly into the tree. Even more disturbing, it was powered not by standard batteries, but by a hidden solar pack connected with wires, ensuring it could record for months without detection. Whoever set it up had been prepared for the long term, waiting patiently for something, or someone. The discovery set off waves of speculation. Was the camera linked to Claire's disappearance? Had someone been following her, watching her every move from the shadows? Investigators feared they were about to uncover something horrifying, because the device was still active when found. That meant it had been silently recording the trail for months after Claire vanished. What could be sitting inside its memory card? Evidence of her final steps. Or worse, her final moments. The authorities, cautious but eager for answers, extracted the memory card and prepared to review the footage. No one said it aloud, but every officer in the room felt the same cold dread. Cameras don't just appear in the middle of forests for no reason. Someone had put it there with purpose, and whatever was on it could be the missing piece of Claire's story. Yet none of them were prepared for the images they were about to see. When investigators finally loaded the footage from the hidden camera, the room fell into a heavy silence. The grainy black and white video flickered to life, showing the forest trail bathed in pale daylight. At first, the clips were ordinary deer moving through the brush, branches swaying in the wind, small animals scurrying across the ground. But then, in one sequence, Claire appeared. She looked exactly as her family had described that morning, wearing her blue hiking jacket, a backpack strapped tightly to her shoulders, and her hair tied back. She moved confidently along the trail, completely unaware that she was being recorded. For a brief moment, it seemed almost comforting, proof that she had made it farther than anyone had thought. But that sense of relief dissolved quickly. Just minutes after Claire passed the camera, another figure entered the frame. Tall, thin, and shadowy, it moved with a slowness that felt deliberate, almost calculated. Its features were hard to make out. The resolution was too poor to capture a clear face. But its posture was unmistakable. It was following her. The distance between them was wide at first, but the figure never lost sight of her. Each time Claire stopped to adjust her bag or look at her map, the figure paused too, standing unnervingly still among the trees. The most unsettling detail was how silent the figure seemed. Wildlife reacted visibly when Claire walked past. Birds fluttered, squirrels darted out of view. But when the figure appeared, nothing moved. The forest almost seemed to hold its breath. The investigators rewound the clip several times, each time focusing on the unnatural stillness around it. It didn't blend with the forest, it swallowed it. The further they studied, the more convinced they became that Claire had never realized she was being followed. As the footage continued, the figure began drawing closer. With each appearance, it closed the gap between itself and Claire. One moment it lingered in the background, barely visible through branches. The next, it stepped nearer, its outline sharper, its movements harder to dismiss as human. What chilled investigators was the way it seemed to disappear between frames. 1 second visible, the next gone, only to reappear again in a different spot. It was not the steady pursuit of a normal hiker. It was something else entirely. Something that seemed to be playing with distance and shadow. By the final minutes of the clip, Claire was only a few steps ahead of the camera. She paused, glanced around uneasily, and for the first time, her confidence faltered. The figure lingered just beyond her, barely visible, but closer than ever before. The video ended with Claire walking out of frame, leaving the figure standing still, watching, waiting. The footage stopped abruptly, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain, she had not been alone on that trail. When investigators pressed play on the final clip, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The earlier footage had been unnerving, but this one felt different. Darker. Heavier. As though the camera itself had captured something it was never meant to witness. Claire appeared again, closer than ever, her face partially visible this time. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her steps were slower, her head turning from side to side as if she had sensed something behind her. The forest around her seemed unusually still, the air heavy with silence. She paused directly in front of the lens, her expression tense, her lips moving as if she were whispering to herself. Then it happened, her body stiffened. She clearly heard something the camera could not. Her head snapped to the left, eyes narrowing, scanning the trees. For a few seconds, she stood frozen, clutching the straps of her backpack tightly. The silence was suffocating. Even the investigators watching the recording later felt the urge to lean in, straining to catch a sound that wasn't there. Then, in an almost mechanical way, she took a cautious step forward, as though drawn by something unseen, something just outside the camera's view. What followed was the most disturbing sequence. A shadow slid into the frame, not walking, but moving in a way that seemed wrong, too fast, too sudden, as if it had bypassed the normal flow of motion. Before anyone could process what they were seeing, a large hand shot forward from the darkness behind Claire. The fingers were long, too long, curling around her shoulder with a grip that looked inescapable. Her mouth opened, but no scream escaped. In one swift, chilling motion, she was yanked backward, her body disappearing from the frame in less than a second. The camera shook slightly, as if disturbed by the sudden movement. Branches rustled faintly in the background, and then everything went still again. There was no struggle, no sound of running, not even the snapping of twigs that should have accompanied such violence. It was as though Claire had been pulled into a void that erased all evidence of her existence. For the next few seconds, the frame remained fixed on the empty trail, the silence heavier than ever before. And then, the footage ended. No static, no corrupted frames, just a clean, abrupt stop, as if whoever, or whatever, had taken her also knew the exact moment to cut the recording. The investigators sat in stunned silence. The weight of what they had just witnessed sinking into the room, like a physical presence. The final clip didn't just suggest that Claire was gone. It implied that something had been waiting for her, something intelligent, patient, and terrifyingly precise. Once the shock of the final footage settled, investigators turned their attention to the camera itself. If they could trace where it came from, perhaps they could uncover who had been watching Claire, or worse, who had been waiting for her. The device was carefully dismantled and examined by forensic specialists. At first, it looked like an ordinary trail camera, the kind used by hunters or nature enthusiasts. But the more they studied it, the stranger it became. All identifying marks had been deliberately scratched off, no serial number, no manufacturer's label, no branding of any kind. It was as if someone had gone out of their way to erase its history. The power source raised even more questions. Instead of store-bought batteries, the camera had been modified to connect to a hidden solar pack, concealed beneath a pile of leaves at the base of the tree. The wiring was neat, almost professional, and designed to keep the device running indefinitely. Whoever set it up hadn't been experimenting. They knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't the work of an amateur camper or curious wanderer. It suggested planning, precision, and patience. Someone had prepared for months, maybe years, to capture something in those woods. Even more unsettling was the angle of the lens. It wasn't facing the usual spots where animals might pass or graze. It was locked on a single narrow section of the trail, the exact route Claire had taken. Investigators debated whether this was coincidence or design, but deep down, they knew that camera hadn't been left to study wildlife. It had been waiting for her, or for someone like her, to walk by. The implications gnawed at them. How many other hikers had unknowingly passed beneath its gaze? Technicians tried to analyze the memory card for more clues. While it contained weeks of footage, most of it showed nothing unusual: empty trails, shifting shadows, the ordinary passage of time. But experts noticed something strange. The files were meticulously organized, with date stamps that seemed slightly altered, as though someone had accessed them before and edited parts of the footage. This raised a terrifying possibility. Had the camera been checked and maintained while it was still active? If so, that meant someone had been physically returning to that tree, over and over, even while search teams scoured the area for Claire. The discovery left investigators uneasy. Every detail about the device suggested intent, deliberate concealment, deliberate positioning, deliberate recording. Yet no trace of fingerprints, DNA, or human presence was found on it. It was as though the camera had appeared on the tree by itself, watching silently, waiting patiently, and capturing moments no one was supposed to see. And the most haunting part, no one could prove who had placed it there, or if they were still watching. Despite months of analysis, the footage and the mysterious camera brought no closure. Claire's body was never recovered, and no further evidence surfaced to explain what had happened in those final seconds on the trail. The forest where she vanished remained deceptively beautiful, with towering pines, winding paths, and the sound of wind whistling through the branches. But for those who knew the story, it no longer felt like a place of peace. It was a place of dread. Hikers who ventured there reported feeling watched, their skin prickling with unease as though unseen eyes followed their every move. Whispers began spreading among locals, growing darker with each retelling. Some believed Claire had been the victim of a predator, a person who used the hidden camera to stalk vulnerable hikers. Others swore the figure in the footage didn't move like a human at all. They pointed out the unnatural speed, the way it vanished between frames, and the eerie silence that followed it. In hushed tones, they described it as a presence that had always lived in the forest, waiting for those who strayed too far from the main path. The most chilling rumors came from seasoned hikers who had braved the silent path themselves. They claimed that cameras, sometimes old, sometimes newer, could still be found hidden in the trees, pointing at strange angles, watching trails where no one should be. Some swore they had discovered cameras that were still active, their tiny lights blinking faintly in the dark. Yet whenever these stories were investigated, the devices would vanish, as if someone had removed them before proof could be gathered. Even more disturbing were the accounts of strange encounters. Lone hikers reported hearing footsteps that echoed theirs, always just behind them, never catching up. Others described moments when the forest fell eerily silent, the usual rustling of animals and chirping of birds replaced by a suffocating stillness. A few even admitted to glimpsing tall, shadowy shapes lurking between trees, only for them to disappear when looked at directly. The deeper the stories went, the more they resembled Claire's final moments on camera: unseen pursuit, unnatural silence, and sudden disappearance. Authorities, of course, could never confirm these tales, dismissing them as fear-fueled imagination. Yet the reputation of that forest changed forever. Parents warned their children never to hike alone. Local guides refused to lead tours anywhere near the silent path. And those who did go often returned shaken, swearing they would never set foot there again. Still, the mystery endured, growing darker with each passing year. A young woman who vanished without a trace, a camera that recorded her last steps, and a figure that defied explanation. And so, the truth about Claire Reynolds remains locked away in the shadows of the forest. The camera revealed enough to terrify us, but not enough to explain what truly happened. Was she stalked by a hidden predator who still roams those woods, planting cameras to watch his prey? Or was it something far older, something the human mind can't quite understand? An entity that waits in silence for the next hiker to wander off the beaten path. To this day, hikers still pass through those trails, some unaware of the story, others daring each other to walk the silent path at night. But one warning always lingers, whispered by locals to anyone who listens. If you feel like you're being watched, you probably are. And remember, not every disappearance leaves a body behind. Sometimes, all that remains is the haunting evidence of eyes that were always watching.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.